Welcome to the Feel Better, Be Better show. Kate and Nevada have spent years exploring ways to live a healthy athletic lifestyle, and this show is all about sharing that knowledge and experience with you. Today, Kate and Nevada welcome a special guest with their own unique experience and advice for living a better and healthier lifestyle.
Hey guys, so this week we got to interview Allison with Birth Peace. She's a doula and she's a certified yoga instructor and she's absolutely great. So listen into this part 1, part 2 on how to be healthy during your pregnancy, as far as movement goes, as far as how labor goes, all the things as women you kind of go through when you end up having a baby and even afterwards. So you go ahead and take a listen today and I hope you enjoy.
All right, so let's see here. We're gonna do what? We're gonna talk about stuff that I'm really knowledgeable about, right? Super knowledgeable about.
Not yet.
No, I mean, you will be.
Not yet. So I get to ask the dumb questions
You
on
get
this
to ask
one.
all the questions.
All right, great. So
questions.
we're gonna got Allison here. She is a doula. What else do you do?
I am a doula and a prenatal yoga instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do a little bit of, I do regular yoga as well, but some baby and me yoga classes as well.
All the things that are not my thing.
It's not your world,
So
that's all right.
Yeah, I'm
Right?
I'm here to learn today. I'm here to learn all about it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And a doula is just a person that is like a support person, a guide, an extra body as you move through the pregnancy and birth journey and postpartum. Not a medical professional in any way or sense of it, but a person who's there for helping with medical lingo that might be thrown around in the hospital, or to help talk about birth preferences, or to give some type of context to, like, hey, my OB asked me this question, I don't know how I feel about it, right? Just somebody as a sounding board, and then as an advocate too when you're in a medical situation.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into those. Now I'm just curious, real quick. So
Yeah.
you said the postpartum and the baby and me yoga.
Yes.
So is that kind of like part of that? Like after the birth too, you're still continuing on as the baby and me, like one of the things, like in like the next like 4 months or 6 months or whatever it is. I don't know.
Yeah. I do it. I mean, yeah, I have clients who like bundle it all together and they're like, I want to do the doula stuff, I want to do yoga, and I want to do baby and me stuff. I have some clients who do that, and I have other clients who are just like, hey, I'm here for the baby and me yoga, and that's what I want to do. So yeah, it all works really well together as a entity, but it also can be broken apart. I talk with my hands.
That's okay.
So do I. I'll let you do the smart questions. I'll reserve to ask the like, okay, I don't know what you're talking about stuff.
Well, I guess kind of to start, if someone were to come to you to be a doula, what does that journey kind of look like? I know you hit a little bit briefly, but as far as like, how often do you usually meet? What kind of topics do you usually go over? How do you help them?
Yeah. With a doula client, people will come to me anywhere between like they just peed on a stick early. And then like I've had people come to me at like 36 weeks, like almost ready to have their baby. And they come to me and they, we sit down, we talk about their birth preferences. That is a big part of what I do, is we talk about like, what do you want your birth to look like? Obviously, I'm not a genie. I cannot grant wishes, but it's really good to talk about all those things so that when we get into the situation, we can say, okay, this is kind of what we are leaning towards. This is what we want. And then like, we also talk about plan B, like what happens if we can't have that? And what does that look like? What does that feel like in our bodies? If I say, things might not go the way you want them to go, right? That's uncomfortable.
I think that's huge too, because like when I had Harper, I did not even know how many intervention possibilities there were in the hospital.
Right.
And what ones really don't affect that much, that can kind of be put by the wayside if you don't want to do them. And what ones are like, no, at a certain point, that one might be really important to consider. And like if you don't know that before you go in, it's really overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a lot of what I'll also cover in my sessions. So I typically do like 3 prenatal sessions with a client. We sit down, we the first entire session is just like, let's talk birth preferences. What are your desires? We talk over like hospital terms. What is an epidural exactly? Where does it go on your body, right? Like some people are like, I know all of that. I've done all the research. I've buried myself in it from day one of pregnancy and I know it all. Other people are like very not into the medical world, in the birth medical world specifically. There's a lot of really specific terms and a lot of specific medications and a lot of interventions, like you said, that come up, and it's really helpful to like have somebody to sit down and talk through them, because you could say, oh, I'm not going to have any of that, and then you're in labor and something changes and now you're being presented with this option, and it's like, oh, well, it's helpful to have a little bit of knowledge to pull from and say, oh, okay, if this happens, this is how I feel about it, or this is what I'm thinking,
Yeah. I kind of remember that too, like with Harper, when I got down towards the end, first kid's very tiring, and I was at home, so I didn't have the options to lean on some of those interventions. But in the moment, because I knew I didn't want to go a certain direction, like I was able to stick with what I wanted. But I'm like, I could totally see how someone is like, I'm so done and I just want this baby out of me, like give me a C-section or whatever it takes. Like I just don't even care anymore, because you're exhausted at that point. Tired. And so I could see if somebody didn't have a concrete set of like, this is what I expect and what I want, and what I'm okay doing at a certain point, like
well, even still you're having somebody come in that's going to give you a solution as well. I mean, they're kind of they're not trying to talk you into it, but they're giving you something that allows you to get out of that scenario. So you're like, yes, that.
Sign me up. Yeah. And it's challenging too, because you don't necessarily know how you're going to react in the moment, right? Like, you think, okay, I have a really good pain tolerance. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be great. And then maybe your baby, right? Babies come down your pelvis in a certain way. Maybe your baby's sunny side up, or OP. And the back of their skull is pressing on your back and you have terrible back labor. And now the pain is something that is hard to even fathom, and let alone make it through. And maybe that is also causing your labor to be really long. And so now you're in way more pain than anybody would expect. And then on top of that, you're exhausted and tired and fatigued. And, we have interventions for a reason. So, you don't know what you're going to get into.
Yeah, pain thresholds are really interesting, though, because, I mean, just because, like, I have a scrape on my knee and it's no big deal, and you have a scrape on your knee and it's like the end of the world, who knows where those nerve endings are, how different situations that hit you. So, I mean, while you may think you're great in pain thresholds, all of a sudden you get into one that you're low on that pain threshold, and it may not work out well. So, I mean, it could be totally different. You may think you're fine and you're not.
Yeah, 100%. And on top of that, right, like your pain threshold, your pain tolerance is different in different settings. Like when you're at home and you're comfy and you're cozy and you stub your toe or whatever, right, it hurts. But like if you're in a high stress situation and like everything's moving fast and you're, I don't know, give me a high stress situation that you might be in where you stub your toe, right, you might experience that pain
anytime I'm awake.
Yeah.
High stress.
High stress. You're a high stress person.
I know. Look at me. I'm still stressed.
Yeah. Right. But like, if you're at home and you're calm and you're relaxed and you're in pain, right? It's like, okay, I can manage this. Or if you're mentally prepared for it, and you're like, I am going to be on top of it. I can stay on top of this pain, this discomfort, and I can manage it. Versus if you're scared, if you're anxious, if you're freaked out because there's like other people moving around you and you don't know what they're doing, and your like nervous system is like a little bit on edge.
I think I've got a good one for you. Like you finally hear something in bed that wakes you up, that you go out to find, where you walk into the kids' room and the kid's doing something crazy. And so then you kind of do that and you turn off the lights and you're walking out and you step on the toy and then you stub your toe on this thing. You probably might hurt a little bit more. I mean, because you got a big meeting in the morning that you shouldn't have got woken up for. That one might hurt a little bit more.
That one's going to hurt more.
Yeah.
That one's 100% going to hurt more. Yeah. Or if you walk into the kids' room and there's puke all over the bed, and you have the morning meeting and you have all the things and you have to clean the,
Yeah.
And you have to pee really badly and you're just like, oh man, yeah.
Yeah, because you just got woken up out of a deep slumber.
Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, you kind of hit on it a little bit too, but like duration plays a big part too. So, I mean, if you have a pretty quick birth, you don't have to go through maybe as much pain tolerance as somebody who has a really long one, because some people are, 24 or more hours that they're in labor, and that's a long time to have contractions and to deal with that.
Yeah. It's, it's a funny thing, labor duration, is that like some people will say like, okay, yeah, I really want the fast birth, but the really quick births sometimes are a little bit more harried, a little bit more chaotic, just because it happens so fast. And yes, the exhaustion factor is definitely a big factor of it. Right, you might have more energy in those short labors, but it sometimes we see like the transition to parenthood is a little bit more abrupt and harder to handle, just because the labor process is so condensed, that sometimes we see a lot of struggle with that, just because you don't think about those long labors as a benefit, because everyone wants like, the shorter labors, a shorter amount of pain. Yeah, of course. But it sometimes has like a negative to it too, the fast labors that you don't think about, of like, oh yeah, the long labor, you kind of have the mental preparation of like,
baby's coming.
We have to accept the fact that a baby is going to be here soon, right? And like, kind of draws that out a little bit.
Not only that, but everybody else gets to get set up. You're not doing the one where you're like,
oh yeah,
in the car,
on the
in
side
the
of the road.
Yeah.
Like, oh no, what just happened?
You're driving to the hospital and you're like, they come right up like, already happened, do what you need to do.
Happened, baby's here. Yes. It's crazy.
Yeah, so another thing I'm interested about is, most of your clients, do you end up having like more that are more home birth or more that are more hospital birth, or like where does your clientele kind of
that's a great question. A lot of people will say like, oh, a doula, that's for like all the home birth, like hippies, like that's not for me, I'm having a hospital birth. But actually, of the 15 births that I've attended in the past 2 years, all but one have been hospital births. Okay. So I attend mostly hospital births, but home births as well.
Now, out of those last 15, do you have like anything that you saw kind of a pattern on that? I mean, that you just seem kind of interesting, just the whole thing.
Oh, just all of it. Not necessarily. A birth like kind of is its own.
I meant more like the desires of people, the situations they got into. I don't know. There might not be enough. You can say no. It's all random.
It's one of those things that like, birth is pretty random, and like you can prepare a whole bunch for it, and there are still births that, are just, wow, didn't see that one coming, or
which is kind of why you do what you do, because it's one of those things where you can sit back and be like, okay, so this is going to happen here, and then we're going to do this, and then this is going to happen, and you're sitting back going like, all right, so let's assume step one doesn't happen at all, and instead we're going to have this thing which you don't even have on your plan,
right?
And so that's kind of your setup, is like, let's get all the way set up for everything looking out.
Yeah, and I like to like tell clients too of like, okay, imagine like we're going to talk about an uncomfortable scenario, right? Like, what happens in the case of like something happens to mom, or what happens if something happens to baby, right? Like, even having those really uncomfortable conversations of like, we need to have some kind of idea of a plan, right? Like, no one can anticipate how they're going to react in those actual situations, but we can say, I have a sense of I'm really going to want this, or I have a sense I'm really going to not want this element to happen if that happens. For people who are really religious, right? Like, do you want to have a person like come in and do prayer with you or something like that, right? There are some people who are like, no, that's not for me. I don't want that. In that case, I just want to be with just my partner and myself and, you know, whatever. And other people are like, no, I need to make sure we have that phone number so we can call the people just in case. And then we come up with those plans, we put them in a box, we set the box on the shelf, and we can move on, right? We can kind of put that box aside and say, hey, we have a plan if we need it. And if we don't need it, great, it's there, but we didn't use it, no big deal. But it's helpful to have thought through those things so that in the moment, if something does happen, we're not scrambling and panicked more so than what you're already going through.
And the stress and all these situations. You can sit back and say, like, I understand you may feel that way, but when we talked about this and planned this, we wanted to go this way.
Yeah, and it's more in a sense of like, hey, when we talked about this is what we discussed. Like, how does that feel for you right now? Is this the way you want to go? And in the moment, it might be like, nope, I don't want that anymore. And we say, okay, how are you feeling about X, Y, and Z? You know?
Yeah, I didn't want to make it seem like you're like, no, you said this way. And it's going to be like, you're just sitting back going like, all right, look, I understand it's a stressful situation. It's a horrible choice or whatever we got to do. I'm making this. But I mean, when we talked about it, we said we were going to do this. So
it's a starting place, right? It's like, here's what we talked about. Here's our starting place. Let's either go this way or find something else. But nobody ever wants, we don't want to talk about those things. All I know is that in the situations that say result in like an emergency cesarean, if you have put it out of your mind so far, I don't want this to happen, I don't want this to happen, I don't want this to happen, so far out of your mind that when it happens, if it happens, the world around you kind of shatters and falls down of like, I'm a failure, like this, like I've failed, my body has failed me, I've failed me, like it just like everything becomes so much harder to move forward from because you're operating from a place of I don't even have a plan because I put it so far out of my head.
They had a plan, they just didn't have any contingency in it. We tend to make plans. We're like, okay, we're going to do this and then we're going to do this and we're going to do this. We don't say in those plans, well, what if that part doesn't happen? Planning people do. Yeah. They understand that scenario, but most people don't. Yeah. So when you get in that situation, you feel almost like you're failing because you came up with this plan that you're not doing it, but it's not really a failure whatsoever. Right. No, you got to find the right thing the right contingencies in place.
Right, exactly. And having that plan B just like has, it allows you. Even the uncomfortable plan B is to talk about, right? An emergency cesarean, right? Those are things that you're like, well, I don't want to sign up for that. I don't want to put that thought into the world. But if you don't plan for it, then it has a tendency to make it more traumatic in the long run. But yeah, we also as doulas do a lot of like childbirth ed. We in all the prep work, right? We do a lot of childbirth ed as well. So like just talking over the basics of what labor looks like, what the body physically goes through in each part of labor, what the baby does during its descent and its turn and its little dance that it does to come out. And we talk about like physical support as well. So like hands-on support techniques like the double hip squeeze or low back pressure, or we talk about acupressure points a lot too, and other ways of managing labor and birth. So yeah, it's not all doom and gloom. We do a lot of other stuff as well.
Well, it's interesting too because not the common person doesn't know how the baby comes down and turns and what can happen different. Like you mentioned, back pain, back pain,
labor,
that not a lot of people necessarily have to go through. But if you don't know that that's a thing, and then you're like, why do these contractions suck? And like I can't put pressure enough places. If you know what it is before going in, then you can kind of reason through it better when you're in the moment versus like think you have it under control and you don't.
Right, exactly. And like back labor is all about baby's position. And so I like to, especially with my prenatal yoga, I talk a lot about optimal fetal positioning or optimal maternal positioning. There's two different camps in that world that like to talk about, is it the mom's position or is it the baby's position that we want to focus on? Ultimately, the way baby is oriented inside the womb affects how labor progresses. And so if baby, like we mentioned, if baby's sunny side up or face up, then the back of their head, the back of their skull is pressing against mom's sacrum as they're coming down, or against the back of their back. And it's excruciatingly painful, very painful. And it just slows everything down. It doesn't, things aren't grooving as easily as they could be. And so back it up a little bit, we can talk before labor gets underway. We can talk about, okay, how is mom holding her body? What are there any like hang-ups in our muscles, our musculature that's around our womb or in our hips or in our pelvis or in our legs or in our back that might be holding the uterus in a certain way that then baby kind of adjusts. Baby will go the path of least resistance. And if there's like, an imbalance of mom's back muscle on one side is a little tight, and so her womb is just sitting a little bit askew, and so baby's gonna sit askew also. And so if we can look at lengthening all of our muscles and balancing all of our muscles so that baby can find a nice easy way of hanging out in our womb, then that can help us down the road of making labor easier and not having to have back labor.
Now, with that too, I don't know if I'm sure there are yoga poses that can help with this, but like even like I know chiropractic and even spinning babies talk about when they get big enough that they're not moving all over the place anymore, helping them turn before you get to labor if you can. So it's easier, because I know like sometimes they'll face forward and you're like, okay, how do we get you to turn around, because you're getting close to birth. And so I know there's different techniques, but are there certain like yoga poses you can do or different things you can do to help with that?
There's a lot of yoga poses that kind of lend themselves to spinning babies. Chiropractic work is awesome too, to just, a balanced pelvis is the foundation of it all. Spinning babies is great. And there's a lot of yoga poses that kind of like work hand in hand with both of those. Specifically, and we talk a lot about like seated posture. When we sit and we slouch, right, our pelvis like turns this way and it just kind of like scoops. And then baby's back is the heaviest part. So baby's gonna like scoop and fall right into the little bowl that we create when we tuck our hips. And so then with baby's back towards your spine in this little cozy bowl, that means that they're face up. So when we talk about late pregnancy, and actually throughout all of pregnancy, we talk about having a nice good posture, because then we can turn our hips slightly forward and just kind of gently guide baby to scoop their back away from your spine.
Interesting.
And there's a lot of yoga poses that would help with that too. Like a child's pose is a really good one. We always talk about yoga, like sitting on yoga balls is really helpful, because sitting on a yoga ball, you can't slouch your lower back because you'd fall off the yoga ball. You kind of naturally are.
If you wedge it in right, you can do it.
There you go. Right. You just need something to keep you still. But yeah, that's like, there's a couple of them. There's a good handful of yoga poses that help us have good posture and help baby kind of orient.
Yoga's pretty good at building the core. So
yeah.
Well, and like ours today that we did, you did a lot with like the hips and the pelvis and the ab muscles anyway. So I mean, all in back. So a lot of that opening and making sure you had enough flexibility and range of motion and stuff that would be important.
Yeah. And we always talk about like, the more movement into your hips that you can get during pregnancy is the better, because it's just lending itself to having those long muscles and having nice even tone to all the muscles that connect to your hips, but also just like not being stiff is really helpful when you're heading into labor, is like having the ability to move your hips in whatever way labor needs you to is so helpful. And again, the movement helps baby to find that optimal position. And so, yeah. Helps keep the long
not being stiff. I need to write that down.
Yeah.
Luckily, you don't have to give birth.
No kidding. I'm only affecting myself.
I mean, it's also probably good to, as a support person, right, to have the movement and ability. But
Thank you for watching. Kate and Nevada hope you've enjoyed this show and found it useful and empowering. If you have any questions or comments, please contact them at kinetics.com. That's KNETICX.com. They're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. And please write a review of the show. Kate and Nevada appreciate hearing the feedback, and they welcome your reviews, and your word of mouth will help others learn how to feel better and be better.